Over the past decade, massive solar and wind farms have sprung up worldwide, yet we still depend heavily on the electricity and heat generated by fossil fuels. With the demand for energy and global temperatures rising every year, the world needs a method to generate large amounts of energy while also being carbon neutral as we transition away from fossil fuels. Nuclear energy is that method. Why nuclear energy? Nuclear energy can generate a huge amount of heat and electricity without directly producing any carbon dioxide. It's a great competitor for fossil fuels and renewable energy. It's also cheaper than fossil fuels and more reliable than solar and wind. But you might have had some concerns. After all, one of the most famous nuclear power plants ever ended in disaster. So let's talk about the elephant in the room and examine exactly how dangerous nuclear energy is. First, I'd like to quote directly from one of my sources. Quote, "The potential risks of nuclear energy are real. The Chernobyl and Fukushima deaths occurred due to direct nuclear impacts, radiation exposure, and psychological stress. Nonetheless, of the two largest nuclear disasters, the death toll was in the order of thousands and hundreds at the latest. Arguably still too many, but far fewer than the millions who die every year from the impacts of conventional energy sources." But how do millions of people die from other energy sources? Researchers at OurWorldData.org found that for every 1 terawatt hour per year of energy produced with coal, an average of 25 people will lose their lives. For an idea, an average of 1 terawatt hour per year of electricity can power 27,000 American homes. These premature deaths can result from air pollution, mining pollution, or accidents. If we use natural gas to produce that terawatt hour per year instead of coal, that number would drop to just 3 premature deaths. Finally, if we use nuclear energy to create that terawatt hour per year, only 0.7 people would have lost their lives. It would take close to 15 years for 1 terawatt hour of nuclear energy to make even one person suffer a premature death. Keep in mind that the deaths caused by the disasters at Chernobyl and Fukushima were factored into this calculation. Even with catastrophic failures like Chernobyl, the data shows that nuclear energy is still safer than fossil fuels. The only things safer are solar, hydroelectric, and wind. If we scale this up to meet the needs of all the homes in the United States, fossil fuels will end up killing a combined total of 4 million people per year. In fact, in China, 4,000 people die from fossil fuel air pollution every day. If you care about human life, then you should care about eliminating fossil fuels. One of the big reasons fossil fuels lead to so many premature deaths, other than causing climate change, is that lots of them need to be mined to keep up with modern energy demands. This leads to the inevitable accidents and pollution wherever you mine anything from the earth. It takes about 2.5 million tons of coal to produce 1,000 megawatts of energy in a year. In contrast, it only takes 27 tons of uranium to produce the same exact amount of energy via a nuclear reactor. For reference, 1,000 megawatts per year is enough to power 460,000 homes in the United States. What about the dangerous nuclear waste created by nuclear fuel? Through mining and carbon emissions, fossil fuels are responsible for way more waste than nuclear. Worldwide, the use of nuclear energy has prevented 64 gigatons of carbon emissions globally over the past 40 years. For perspective, 64 gigatons of carbon would be created if the U.S. only ran on coal for 35 years. Additionally, only about 10% of nuclear waste is truly waste. There are new and innovative ways that nuclear waste can be recycled back into fuel. This makes the few barrels created by nuclear waste treatable compared to the amount of carbon released by fossil fuels every year. Some might argue that nuclear energy is an outdated form of generating energy, and might ask why we can't just use solar and wind. The United States has had its energy demands almost double over the past 20 years. While installing renewable energy as fast as we can't keep up with the energy demands without relying on fossil fuels or nuclear energy. Another problem is that solar and wind aren't as consistent or as reliable as nuclear energy. Sometimes it isn't sunny enough for solar panels to function for a whole town, especially in the night and mornings when people use electricity the most. And wind speeds vary too much between the seasons to be 100% reliable. To make renewables work the way fossil fuels or nuclear does, you would need to build large battery storage facilities to store all the excess energy created when the sun and wind are at their peak and then use it at night. But this method requires a lot of space and metals like lithium, cobalt, and beryllium, which will need to be excavated from the earth to make large rechargeable batteries. Other countries seem to agree with this sentiment. Countries like China, India, Finland, Russia, and France are all investing in nuclear power and have been able to build them at competitive costs. It might help you to know that the future of nuclear is promising. Nuclear technologies are being developed every year, making nuclear energy cheaper, cleaner, and more appealing. India is taking advantage of their large supplies of thorium and creating thorium nuclear reactors, which are even safer and cheaper than the uranium and plutonium reactors I've been discussing this entire time. And here in the US, the Idaho National Laboratory is creating microreactors, which are small, efficient nuclear reactors that can be hooked up to any modern power grid, delivered anywhere, and deliver megawatts of electricity. In fact, one can even fit inside of a semi-truck. Nuclear energy can also be very affordable. To generate 1,000 megawatts of power in a year using nuclear energy, you would only really need to spend $64 million on uranium fuel rods. To produce the same amount of energy using only natural gas for a year, you would need to spend $450 million on fuel. But if nuclear energy is so great, why isn't it everywhere already? Nuclear power plants take a long time to construct compared to natural gas plants. Natural gas takes about 2 to 3 years to construct, which is fast compared to the 6 to 8 years needed to build a nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plants also have a large upfront cost, much higher than natural gas. But despite these setbacks, a nuclear power plant uses so little fuel that it will be extremely profitable once operational. Keep in mind that one uranium fuel pellet, which is the size of a AA battery, can generate the same amount of energy as half a ton of natural gas. Still, this massive time investment is unappealing to most American politicians. Since most elected officials in the United States have a term year of 2 to 4 years long, the 6 to 8 year long build time of a nuclear power plant isn't appealing compared to the quick and simple 2-year natural gas plant. Nuclear power plants are incredibly profitable, but the city must be able to take economic and political risks to get that profit. Arguably, nuclear's biggest problem is its bad press. The public tends to focus on the small handfuls of disasters instead of the daily victories achieved by nuclear energy. For example, it might surprise you to know that over 70% of France's electricity is generated by nuclear power plants. That's over 47 million people getting clean energy from nuclear power plants for close to 40 years without any world-ending disasters. In conclusion, nuclear power is safer, cheaper, and cleaner than fossil fuels, providing the same amount of electricity with equal consistency. Most fears about nuclear energy either come from a place of misunderstanding or have already been solved with decades of research and innovation. If we, as an environmentally conscious society, want to save the Earth without giving up large parts of our lifestyle, we should heavily consider nuclear energy.